This is going to be a very, very, very different session than probably any session here. I purposely try not to put a bunch of sources and quotes and stats and things from 20 years ago or 10 years or 5 years ago to prove a point. This is a story session. I don't really get nervous in front of crowds usually, but I'm a little nervous because this session really involves me. So I'm going to give you a quick clip that's going to give you a little oversight into my story, and then I'm going to use 5 personal stories to tie into things that I think are really important in the HR, talent management, and analytics fields. All right, so we're going to dive in. One of the things that I like to do is always share my why. So I started training.com really to empower growth and shape the future of learning through innovative training systems. Because education and learning is one of those things that can take someone from where they are to where they want to be. And so that's my crew there, and we're going to take a few minutes, and I'm going to tell you my story through this video.
I think the biggest thing that I would say to someone who was in my situation growing up, who's a kid who might find themselves there now, and it's really difficult, you're not defined by your circumstances today. When I think about my story, I recognize that I probably shouldn't be here today. I should probably be one of those statistics that you hear about that finds themselves in a generational poverty that is feeding into the criminal justice system. Because those are the scenarios that I grew up in. You know, my parents got divorced at an early age when I was 3 years old. My mom was trying to get her MBA, and it was very difficult. It's a single mom with 3 kids, and this friend at that time introduced her to crack cocaine. And that turned into a 30-plus year struggle with substance abuse. The things of the drug world just became, unfortunately, a norm. Mom began to pawn things in the house in order to be able to buy more drugs. We would go and live with grandma for a little bit, but 4 kids living with grandma just didn't work out, and so we ended up in the projects in a little town in Piedmont, Alabama. The funny thing about it is that no one taught me more about love, and no one taught me more about sacrifice than my mom. It could be that she would take your last dollar, but she was always the first one to give her last. In my household, it was expected for you to do your best. It was expected for you to take school seriously, and so mom set those expectations at home. I had the opportunity to go to the Alabama School of Math and Science and live on campus, take college level classes my junior and senior year, and that happened because my mom really cared about education. After college, I had the opportunity to move out to Texas and be the internet systems architect for a consulting company. And it was, while I was there, my 2 younger brothers were at home, and they were really struggling. My mom's substance abuse problems had gotten worse, and they were caught up in that scene. And so they were taken away from my mom. I got custody of my brothers and brought them to Dallas, to McKinney, Texas, and those struggles came with them. So we had to work our way through that, and we had to grow through that. My youngest brother was reading on a 2nd grade level. He was in the 4th grade, and it took us 2 years of working with the teachers and with the school hand in hand to get him reading on a 6th grade level by the time he was in the 6th grade. I was able to start a company in 2003 that focused on career education and training and development, which is near and dear to my heart. It's one of the reasons why I was able to make it out of the situation that I grew up in. So I get to return that. And at that time, my mom also came from Alabama to live with us and spent 9 months in really total rehab inside the home. It was so awesome because from that moment, she was off of hard drugs. And she never went back to hard drugs again. I think the biggest thing that I would say to someone who was in my situation growing up, who's a kid who might find themselves there now, and it's really difficult, you're not defined by your circumstances today. Don't worry about the things you can't do, or the things you can't afford, or the things that you don't have. Don't take shortcuts. The obstacles that we face today really are the things that are catalysts for our future. And to not look at it in a negative light, but to realize that there's growth there and there's opportunity even in the midst of struggle.
So, thank you for enduring that. Deeply, deeply personal. There's a little bit more information on my blog about that. But I think the first point I want to make today is that sometimes in business, I started Training.com in 2004, started KnowledgeFlo 2 years ago. It took me 15 years before I told my story. Because in business, we're often told that there's a certain part of us just doesn't belong in our corporate, in our day-to-day lives. And so my first challenge to you is to run into your story and not away from it. If you want to get peak performance, if you want to get the best out of your people, you have to meet them where they are and embrace their story, embrace them fully, and they're going to give themselves fully to your organization. So we're gonna jump in. In each of these points that I'm going to make, I'm going to tell you your story to start it. Before I do, first point is about the importance of community. So I want you to answer this question for me. You can text 1234 to the number, or you can go to the URL there, enter 7355, and you can respond to this poll. What do you consider the most important factor in building true community? In our businesses, we know that the importance of community. We value it. It's a word that we throw out a lot, especially in HR. And in our space, we talk a lot about community. But how do we really build it within our organizations? So, personal connection, shared goal, feeling of safety, and no one chose consistent gathering. Love it, love it, love it. So, I want you to think about back to the time when you were a kid. Did anyone, when you were a kid, have a park in your neighborhood or playground? Did you ever visit that park without your parents? How far was it from your house, might I ask? Quarter mile? What is it that made it okay for you as a young kid to walk a quarter mile to a park without your parents? Surrounded by cornfields, right?
Yeah, few people, small town.
Few people, small town? Yeah. When I think about that, it's really interesting that it's because of the community. You know, in that environment. I grew up in the projects in Alabama. So from the outside looking in, our community was not safe. A lot of violence, a lot of drug deals, prostitution. Just the bad people were there. People with money came to our neighborhood to buy drugs. They did not come there to hang out. And so from the outside looking in, our community was not safe. And yet somehow in the midst of our community, we found safety, we found security, we found belonging. We found that personal connection. And that's because there was someone there in our neighborhood who was what we call a matriarch. Her name was Miss Joyce. And she was, by all intents and purposes, from our standards, an absolute failure. Fourth generation in the projects and on welfare. Her mom was on welfare, she was on welfare in the projects, her kids were on welfare in the projects, and their kids. Yet Miss Joyce's house was right across from a big field. And that's where we went to play kickball, to play football. At Miss Joyce's house, there was no drinking, there was no smoking. She had this sense of accountability. It's where we played Monopoly on Friday and Saturday instead of hanging out with all the other things that were going on in our community. She had accountability, she had safety, she provided structure for us. And that became a very, very safe place in our community. And a few years ago, before she passed away, I visited her, and I just got back from a trip, and I don't really go home to Alabama that much. And I went home, and she said, you know, Jeremy, I've been to so many countries recently. I'm thinking, Miss Joyce, you're 300 pounds. You don't really get out of your chair. There's no way you've been to multiple countries. And she said, look over on the wall. And on the wall, she had pictures from Facebook of countries and places that I had been. She said, I've been through you. And I think a lot of times when we think about statistics, Many will look at her life as a failure. And for us, she was critical to our success and critical to me standing before you today. And she provided that place of safety. And so when we're thinking about building community, we don't have a lot of time to go through a lot of these. The first part of that, what I consider success, is that culture. That safe place that you're able to build within your organization. That place of accountability that you're able to build within your organization. That can lead to collaboration. And then lead to contribution. We can't build great community within our organizations without contribution and knowing that our contribution matters. And then finally, it's that connection. And connection is really the glue, because it helps the brain begin to process things and see things a little bit differently than maybe we had before. Who in here drives, has a car? It's in big cities, some people may not. What car do you have? You have a Highlander. How long ago did you get it? A few years ago. So how many Highlanders do you see on the road now? Yeah. How many Highlanders did you see on the road before you got yours? How many Highlanders were on the road before you got yours? The same amount. You just didn't have a connection to it. So if we're going to build true community in our companies and we're going to leverage our technology, we got to bring that connection point in. And that's really what's going to lead to the community that we desire. The next point we're going to make is around ownership, motivation, and responsibility. So in my neighborhood, right across from my project, actually where I live, there was a park. Had a basketball court, had swings, all those things. Now the park was kind of the epicenter of the community, as you can imagine. Now, who actually owned the park? The city of Piedmont owned the park. So we didn't, the city did. Who was responsible for keeping the park tidy and neat? City. If the housing authority director had sent a memo out to all of the people in the projects and said, I'd like you to keep the park across your street clean, how do you think that would have gone? Let me highlight this. This right here is the amount of money that we had to pay for our housing project, $45 a month. My mom left this in my memory book, and actually she put together all the artifacts you're going to see in this. My mom put them together in a memory book for me to remind me of where I come from. And based on our income, which was virtually nothing, we had to pay $45 a month. So you get a memo to people who are paying $45 to $100 a month to keep your park clean. How do you think it's going to go? Well, it just so happened that one Saturday my mom got up and she decided that she was going to get all of us up, my brother, sister, and I, and ask us to go and clean the park. And so the first Saturday that happened, it was really fun. You go, you kind of clean the park, you think, okay, this is interesting. So we go out there, we clean the park. The next Saturday, Mom said, hey, it's time to go clean the park again. And we're like, yo, that was last week. That was fun, but really not into cleaning the park every Saturday. It's not ours. I mean, we don't own it. It's not my responsibility. I was actually thinking and saying this as a kid. This is not my responsibility. And of course, being the kind of community we are, by the third week, other people were noticing that we were cleaning up the park. And they would come out and they would throw things on the ground and say, pick it up, slave. And we had to pick it up. Because there's a principle that my mom was teaching me about ownership and responsibility. But here's what's interesting. As you build true community, week after week, by the sixth week, instead of people throwing things down on the ground and saying, pick it up, they joined in. And by the 12th week, we didn't even have to go outside. Everyone from our community got up every Saturday morning and we cleaned our park. See, that's how we produce change. We don't do it necessarily through programs and memos. We do it through true community and this concept of ownership. If you don't build the concept of ownership into your staff and in your teams and all the things that you do, then you're not going to get the outcomes and the peak performance that you desire. Because that's what it takes. And there's also an expectation factor. When you set low expectations, you get low results. And somehow within our organizations, this concept of expectation and bias just creeps its way in without us even thinking. We've got all this data that we're trying to measure for these factors, but somehow bias creeps in. and this concept of expectation, because we have expectation tied to our job roles. So another story from growing up was I was in the 8th grade and going into high school. Now in the 8th grade, I was in the gifted and talented program. I had A's and B's, and I graduated middle school, and it's time to go to high school. And so in my town, you can imagine it was the South, in Alabama. I get to high school the first day, and I look at my schedule, because you didn't set your schedules back then, they set them for you. And I noticed that I was on the standard track. At my school, there was a standard track and advanced track, and I think they were trying to think about AP. But even though I was in a gifted and talented program in the 8th grade, and even though I had A's and B's, the assumption was, because of where I was from, because of my social economic status, and because of my race, it was just assumed, like most of the African Americans in my town, that I was going to be on the standard track. And so naturally that bias creeped in, even though the data told a different story. And so we want to pay attention to our data. Now, probably later I'm going to tell you the data doesn't always get it right, but for this point, I'm going to say let's pay attention to our data. We have all this data. Are we looking at it? Because my school didn't. Fortunately, my mom did, and I was actually one of those kids who really was concerned, and so we did get that switched up. The next point, if you want to get peak performance, if you want to get the most out of your employees, this concept of mentoring, coaching, and a little motivation theory thrown in is quite interesting. And this is where it gets personal again. As a kid, I went through a lot. My dad passed away 2 days before my 14th birthday and drowned fishing. We moved to Buffalo, New York when I was a kid, actually, and we lived there 9 years away from my dad, and I didn't really see him at all for 9 years, and then he decided to get his family back together. And so later, after I started my company, after I bought a house and got custody of my brothers, and I was processing one morning, and I wrote a spoken word, which is something I often did to connect and deal with the things that I was dealing with. It went a little something like this. I call you Father, but do I really comprehend the meaning of that word spoken when my prayers begin? When I say Father, what do I really mean? An empty word that broke a home, a shattered dream? The dad I never really had? Why does his word I so often speak stir little emotion within me? So I ask myself, what does Father really mean? Broken dreams, broken home, broken everything, left alone, standing strong, lacking vision, growing quickly, making decisions. A silly card for Christmas, not even a call? I'm your little boy. Do you care at all? We didn't throw a ball. We didn't shoot a hoop. We didn't catch a pass or even miss a bloop. You never saw a game. You never called my name. You never told me that I didn't have to always win. Father, what does his word really mean? God, when my dad left off, you picked up. You filled that void and overran my cup. You gave me godly uncles and placed other godly men directly in my path to be my friend, impart some wisdom, and show me the way. And in the end, you even brought my dad around again. And now I see him as my friend. So when I say Father, I say Daddy. I say I love you. So I come to you like the child I am, asking you to lead me, Father. Please hold my hand. As I walk across the street of life, I praise you, God, for your sacrifice. So when I say Father, what do I mean? Everything more than I can dream. If we're going to get peak performance, we're going to have to surround our people by mentors. We're in a reskilling craze right now in our organizations, and I'm sure your data is showing you that. We're not just going to get there because we send people to courses. We've got to figure out how we connect people in these mentoring relationships. And I believe that our technology today can do it in such a way that is very different than we're doing it right now. Not just so much of the one-on-one. There's so much knowledge and information within our organizations. We're not tapping into that knowledge and cross-learning and cross-sharing. And that's how we're going to We're going to foster the relationships within our organizations that's going to yield peak performance because the data and the knowledge and the information is already there. And I'm going to skip a last slide, but there was an opportunity that I had. We talk about motivation. I had a teacher push one of my buttons because I wanted to be on the math team, and the data said one thing. The data said that my average was like 92, and the cutoff was like 96 to get on the math team. And I told this person that I'm willing to work hard, I'm willing to study, I'm willing to figure out what it takes. I'm smart enough, work with me. And she said, Jeremy, that your average isn't high enough to be on the math team. Well, just so happened that the math coach said, Jeremy, I'm gonna work with you a little bit. And so I decided at the end of that semester, the next semester, I was gonna prove her wrong. And what happened is I made a perfect score on every single test for the rest of the year. And that math teacher created another spot for me on the team and scored the highest on the test. But when people show opportunity, we've got to allow people to volunteer for challenging work. And we have to challenge them along the way. And we've got to provide an environment of continuous feedback and continuous encouragement if we want to get peak performance. And so the modern performance and talent management systems have changed. In 2006, I had the opportunity to work with a global media company, and they were one of our first clients in our first talent management system we built. And we took them from a 33% completion score on their performance review to the very first year in our system, an 88% completion score. That was really exciting. We were applauding ourselves. We were awesome. I mean, next year I was in Amsterdam and London rolling out the European version. They said, hey, we need 360, and we need it in 30 days. My IT manager looked at me and said, Jeremy, you're not going to say yes, right? Because it's in 30 days. We can't do it. Of course, I said yes. We built 360 in 30 days, and everything was going great. Until about 4 years ago, I looked up and I realized we were like every other software company out there, producing lagging indicators, not leading indicators. Because it's the continuous that we strive on. How do we get peak performance in sports? One of the things I get irked at is like all these celebrations. Why do they happen? I mean, every single goal we celebrate, I mean, football players, they sack a guy on second down and they're celebrating like they won the game and there's like 3 more quarters to go. And then I realized, what are they doing? They're continuously motivating and encouraging each other and continuously giving feedback. And if the top athletes at the top of theirs need that in order to get peak performance, what do we need? Because the opposite happens as well when things aren't going well. How are we encouraging and how are we leveraging technology in our organizations to deliver that? And I'm not going to get into this little proprietary feedback methodology that we created, but we are moving towards this real-time micro feedback that we can give anytime, anywhere. Just like in Workday session, they talk about their anytime feedback. We think that and the collection of that data is going to give you crazy insights into the performance of your people. And that's how you're going to get peak performance. And lastly, this continuous learning and knowledge sharing is critical. In 1995, my life changed. You see, in 1994, I was in the 10th grade and I was at the poor school district in Alabama. The highest math you could take was Algebra 2. Pre-Cal was a self-study. In the 10th grade, they told me I could not double up on geometry and trigonometry because I wasn't smart enough. And they didn't believe I could do it. And in our school, we had 2 Jeremys that applied to this boarding school in Alabama called the Alabama School of Math and Science, where you lived on campus, took college-level classes. And I applied, and I was accepted, along with another Jeremy from my school who was actually on paper very, very, very way smarter than me. Like, I think he made equivalent to like a 1250 on the SAT in the 7th grade. By the way, that's like 99.9 percentile at that time. But we got a chance to go on campus, take college level classes. So when I graduated high school, I had BC calculus. It was intense. Every 9 weeks, we did an entire semester worth of work. How did we do it? At our school, we had this concept called study hall. Now, this is interesting. We took the top 144 students from the state of Alabama, put them all in one school, and you're going to require us every single day to spend 2 hours in study hall? We had the number 2 physics student in the nation in our school. My friend Ron Williams created a compression algorithm that beat PK Zip by 11% while he was in high school. Too bad WinZip came out the next year. Crap. But somehow in that environment, in that study hall every night, that's how we did it. We continuously learn, we continuously help each other, we continuously share. When you got stuck with your work, right there in that study hall, that's how you got answers. And in our organizations, we have to move these mindsets from this traditional mindset around learning to this modern and more networked style of learning. We got to move away from the silos to really learning together. How many of you have taken an e-learning course this year? Now, your company knew that you started, you finished, and what your score was. Do you have any idea how anyone else in your company experienced that same course? No. We're creating silos. And the number one thing around learning, if we're actually going to get peak performance and really learn, if we look at how humans learn, we don't learn from information. Information is not enough to produce change. If it were, we'd all be great leaders if we've all taken a leadership course. I'm wrapping up to my last bit. So this concept that you can do in your companies right now is you can look at your learning. You can build network learning around your static content, and you can build network learning around your live content and connect people before the training. Build curiosity before they ever get to the course. And then afterwards, build communities where they can interact and engage. And just for an example, just imagine if we were here, we could have been engaging in this conversation before this conference ever started. You could have watched my video before you got here. And then afterwards, we could do all of our interactions there, and afterwards, we can continue to learn in an environment. And so this continuous learning concept is critical to getting the best. LXPs are awesome. They tell you what you might need to learn as an individual. We need to begin to learn and share together because the knowledge and information that we need is right in our organizations. My time is up. You've been amazing. I had to skip some stuff, but would love your feedback as well. And this is about tracking informal learning, by the way, which is really cool to bring in informal learning into your LMS environment. You can do that. So questions, acknowledge or encourage me, give me some feedback. Thank you so much.